the titanium straps carved deep into his skin, biting like icy blades against raw flesh. Every breath he took was shallow, trembling, echoing in the sterile chamber that smelled of chemicals and metal. The reinforced steel chair held him captive, immovable, bolted to the floor like a monument to his containment. Above him, fluorescent lights beamed down with punishing brightness, washing everything in clinical white. His eyes, too sensitive now for such intensity, flickered with pain as he tried to focus. Stillness was not peace. It was pressure, the pressure of memories that scraped at the edges of his mind like broken glass. He tried to resist it, to anchor himself to the now, but the past surged forward like a wave, unstoppable. His muscles tensed. He tried to break free. He pushed against the restraints with every ounce of strength in his altered body. The metal didn't budge, not even a fraction. Every nerve screamed in protest. Yet the strain was not just physical. Somewhere, deep in his chest, something stirred. Something ancient. Something waiting. Across the room, the armored door stood battered. Deep, unnatural dents scarred its surface, suggesting that something, perhaps even he, had tried to force its way out. That image alone unlocked the first fragment of a forgotten memory. A laboratory, glass exploding around him, soldiers shouting, and a man in a white coat retreating in panic. But the most vivid memory wasn't the chaos. It was the pain in his leg, a tranquilizer dart, not a bullet, that had felled him like a beast. He remembered being dragged, half-conscious, through endless corridors, while faceless voices dissected his existence in sterile tones. They spoke of doses, of danger, of death counts and survival, not as if he were a man, but a subject. More memories spilled forth, bleeding into the present like a slow leak of poisoned ink. He saw the transformation begin within himself, felt it twist through his body like fire under the skin. It wasn't something he could control. His flesh betrayed him, warping, shifting, breaking the human form to reveal something far older and more dangerous beneath. And then, he saw her, suspended in green liquid, her form barely recognizable beneath the invasive cables and the harsh light of science gone too far. Her skin, a blend of blue and green, shimmered with unnatural beauty. Her body was still, violated, studded. Yet even in unconsciousness, she emanated a quiet strength. The memory struck him like a spear through the chest. He had to reach her. He had to get her out. With that thought came clarity, and with clarity came rage. A steady, mounting storm within his chest. He pulled again at the straps, fueled now not by desperation, but by purpose. The metal strained, groaned in protest, but refused to give. His heart pounded louder, faster. His breath grew hot, laced with something not quite human. His skin tingled as his body teetered on the edge between forms, human and something else entirely. Then something shifted, not in the room, but within his mind. A voice emerged, not as a sound but as an impression, a presence etched directly into his consciousness. It didn't speak in words. It commanded. It beckoned him to awaken, not just physically, but fully, to rise as something more than what the scientists believed they had caged. In that moment, visions exploded behind his eyes. He saw tunnels, impossibly ancient, carved into the earth by hands that were not human. He saw creatures with stone-like skin, glowing blue eyes, elongated skulls, and 6 fingers on each hand. These beings were not of this world, yet they felt familiar, as if a long-forgotten lineage had finally revealed itself. His body responded before his mind could grasp it. Blue energy coursed through his veins like liquid lightning. Muscles rippled with raw power. He felt something inside him snap, not break, unlock. And just like that, he was no longer restrained. The bonds that had held him shattered, not with sound, but with a sensation, like silk tearing under pressure that had long exceeded its limits. What moments before had been an unbreakable prison was now twisted scrap hanging loosely from his wrists. The chair, once his confine, looked suddenly small, irrelevant. His breathing deepened. Something primal had awakened inside him. He rose slowly, his movements fluid yet unfamiliar, as if guided by instincts not his own. The sterile chamber around him seemed to shrink in the presence of his new form. The cold floor beneath his feet pulsed with heat from his skin. It sizzled faintly, the contact of flesh not made for this world. The air shifted. The reinforced door, the one scarred with violent dents, groaned open. Light from the corridor spilled into the room, revealing the silhouette of the colonel. The man whose voice had haunted his memories, whose blood-stained lab coat spoke of the experiments, the suffering, the crimes committed in the name of science. But this time, he wasn't the one under control. Heat radiated from his body in waves, warping the air. A deep, internal pull urged him forward. And when he moved, it was like the wind, too fast for the eye to follow, too sudden for the mind to anticipate. He left nothing to chance. Every fiber of his being surged toward one single purpose: to find her. Alarms blared before the colonel could even react. The facility was awakening too. Steel shutters sealing corridors, red lights flashing across white walls, automated warnings screaming of containment breach. But nothing could contain him now. He burst through the corridor like a storm in motion. Armed guards appeared in formation, their weapons drawn, their training drilled into them by fear and repetition. But they had never trained for this. They shouted commands, their voices barely audible over the sirens. Not that he could understand them now. Not that it mattered. Each step he took cracked the floor beneath. His presence distorted the air, steam rising from his shoulders. Bullets flew. Some ricocheted from hardened scales that had replaced patches of his skin. Others pierced the flesh but failed to stop the creature he had become. Blood, blue-green and luminous, sprayed across the walls, hissing where it landed. And yet, he did not slow. A roar tore from his throat, deep, guttural, alien. It shook the walls and chilled the air. He struck like a force of nature. Claws slashed through metal and flesh. He moved without thought, only instinct. Instincts that belonged to another species, another time. His limbs obeyed a rhythm he had never been taught. His senses sharpened to pinpoint each movement around him. When the last soldier collapsed in a heap of blood and shredded armor, silence fell again, broken only by the whirring of machines and the rasp of his breath. He stood still, chest heaving, surrounded by destruction. His hands, slick with blood, trembled. For a moment, he stared at them, not in pride, not in victory, but in confusion. In horror. What had he become? Yet the pull in his chest remained. She was still down there, and time was running out. Driven by urgency, he tore through the next security door as if it were paper. It crumpled under his weight, fragments of metal scattering like dry leaves. Behind it, a wide chamber opened up, and in its center, surrounded by sterile equipment and blinking monitors, floated the one being that still tethered him to something resembling humanity. Zodra, suspended in green liquid, unconscious, cables protruding from every limb. Machines hummed and blinked, analyzing her vital signs. She looked weightless, cold. Her body, once powerful and regal, now looked frail and emptied by the relentless probing of science. Technicians screamed and fled at the sight of him. One of them scrambled to hit another alarm. More sirens, more doors locking down. None of it mattered. He sprinted to the tank, claws clashing against the thick glass. He struck once, a crack. Again, a web of fractures. One final blow, and the tank exploded outward, spilling its chemical contents across the floor like a burst vein. She fell, limp and lifeless. He caught her before she could hit the ground. Her skin felt icy, her body unnaturally still. Cables trailed from her like parasites. He tore them free one by one, careful not to damage what remained. Yet she didn't move. No breath, no sign of life. Still holding her in his arms, he felt something stir again within him. The energy from before, the blue fire that had ripped through his own body, it called out again. Not with rage, but with something older, gentler. He placed his hand over her chest and let it flow into her. The reaction was instant. Not visible, but felt. Her body trembled faintly. Heat returned to her skin. Muscles tightened. And then, like a drowning soul emerging from the depths, she drew in a breath. Her eyes opened. And though she was weak, though her body was broken, something in her gaze said, "Not yet. Not finished." There was still much to do. The facility trembled around them as distant explosions rippled through its foundations, not from combat, but from failing systems. Warning lights pulsed like arterial signals across walls of concrete and alloy. Sirens howled above like mourning voices, echoing the collapse of a secret too monstrous to remain hidden. Jake supported her weight with one arm while scanning the laboratory. She was still weak, her limbs trembling, her breath shallow, but her presence was unmistakably alive. He could feel the connection between them, not just forged in that moment of shared power, but anchored in something older. Something the scientists never understood. His senses sharpened, not just as a man, but as something beyond that. He felt movement in the air, the thrum of energy in the floor, the direction of hidden corridors, as if his body had merged with the very memory of the place. He no longer navigated by sight alone. Instinct guided him. Together they moved, half running, half stumbling through the sterile maze of hallways. He shielded her from collapsing debris as the facility turned in on itself. Through each turn and intersection, he hunted for a way out, a way deeper, wherever that invisible pull inside him directed. Eventually, they reached it, a corridor less traveled, marked not by warning signs but silence. The air here was colder, heavier. Every surface was layered in dust, untouched by time or maintenance. The lights flickered. Some had already died. At the end stood a door unlike the others, not just metal, but fortified. A relic within a relic. The reinforced hatch was sealed shut, protected by retinal scanners and a magnetic lock far beyond anything civilian or military. He stared at it. Then, she reached forward. Her hand, though trembling, touched the scanner with quiet certainty. The panel sparked violently, then smoked. Something inside the system had been overridden, not by brute force, but by recognition. Not of her identity, but of her blood. The door opened. A staircase spiraled downward, carved from corroded iron and slick with condensation. With every step they descended, the air shifted. It thickened with minerals and secrets. The artificial hum of machinery above faded into the growl of ancient silence. Here, time didn't move forward, it waited. The corridor below bore no signs of human design. The walls were not built but grown, smooth and curved, covered with strange blue veins that pulsed like capillaries beneath translucent stone. The temperature dropped again, but neither of them noticed. Their skin had changed, adapted, as if responding to the environment of its origin. He touched the wall and felt something beneath the surface, a vibration. It wasn't mechanical. It was alive, a dormant presence, as if the structure itself were sentient and aware of their arrival. Further in, the tunnel expanded. The ceiling stretched high into a dark dome supported by crystalline columns, black as obsidian but streaked with glowing veins of cobalt light. The very air shimmered with static energy, and the silence wasn't absence, it was presence. A breathing, watching silence. Symbols adorned the walls, etched deep into the stone. Some were geometric, others organic, flowing like rivers. They were not written to be read, they were meant to be felt. He didn't need translation. Their meaning unfurled inside his mind like memory surfacing after centuries of slumber. This place was not a laboratory. It was a vault, a cradle, a cathedral for the forgotten architects of both their bloodlines. She moved ahead of him now, her steps steadier, her spine straighter. Every moment in this place restored her, not just physically, but spiritually, as if something long lost had finally been returned to her. He followed, his heart pounding not from fear or exhaustion, but revelation. This place had been waiting. For them. The chamber before them defied explanation. It was not simply a room beneath the earth. It was a living archive carved from the bones of time itself. The ceiling curved like the dome of a cathedral, but it pulsed faintly, as if exhaling breath older than any human civilization. The pillars were not built for support but to transmit something: power, memory, essence. In the center stood a platform, circular and etched with runes that glowed dimly beneath layers of dust. The floor responded to their presence, illuminating a path of blue light beneath their feet as they crossed the threshold. The air vibrated, not with sound, but with knowledge trying to surface, as if the chamber recognized them and began to stir from its slumber. Around them, crystalline structures floated gently above pedestals, defying gravity with serene purpose. Each shard contained scenes, memories preserved not in ink or film, but in motion and sensation. Glimpses flickered within, towering beings with elongated skulls and stone-like skin manipulating energy with their bare hands. Cities carved into mountains glowing from within, hybrids, like them, standing at the borders of two worlds, neither fully creature nor human. He stepped closer to one of the floating shards. It pulsed brighter. A flood of images invaded his senses, not in sequence, but in essence. He felt the rise of an ancient civilization born from the stars, its architects shaping not only worlds, but bloodlines. They had come to Earth not to conquer, but to sow, to experiment, to prepare. He staggered back, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the memory. His breathing was heavy, but it wasn't fear. It was understanding. All of this, the experiments, the suffering, the facility above, had been an echo. A human attempt to replicate something far older, but flawed, crude, blind to the original purpose. She approached another shard. Her scales shimmered brighter now, her posture tall and composed. Within the crystal, her reflection merged with another, a being who looked like her, yet ancient, larger, regal. A queen, perhaps. A guardian. There had been others like her, long before human memory began. Their bodies were shaped by design, but their spirits had been born of purpose. Together, they wandered through the vault, uncovering more fragments. Some depicted rituals, not religious, but genetic, spiritual. Others showed the downfall of the ancients, a cataclysm brought not by war, but by entropy. A slow fading, a decision to hide their legacy beneath layers of secrecy, to be found only by those who carried the code within. They were not mistakes. They were keys. The vault had waited, not for invaders, not for scientists, but for heirs. Their blood was the map, their existence, the trigger. At the far end of the chamber, beneath a monolith covered in pulsating runes, stood a narrow passage cloaked in shadow. It radiated the same energy, but deeper, older, unfiltered by containment. It led not into another room, but into something else entirely. A passage not just beneath the earth, but toward origin itself. And it called to them. They stood at the threshold, their bodies illuminated by the chamber's glow, no longer prisoners or specimens. No longer man and creature, but something new, something becoming. And the vault, silent for millennia, opened its path to them. They crossed the threshold in silence. Behind them, the vault dimmed, its crystalline memories fading like closing eyes, as if the chamber had passed its duty on and now returned to rest. Ahead, the narrow passage descended into darkness. The air was colder here, denser, not lifeless but ancient, like breathing inside a tomb that still remembered the breath of its dead. The walls of the tunnel were made of a smooth, dark stone that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Veins of faint blue energy pulsed beneath the surface, forming a lattice of moving patterns, as if the stone itself carried a nervous system. Every step they took triggered a shimmer across the walls, not randomly, but in recognition. As if the place was reading them, measuring what lay in their blood. They moved cautiously, not from fear, but from awe. The further they walked, the more their bodies began to respond. Muscles tightened, bones resonated. Their senses sharpened, colors deepened, sounds expanded, time slowed. Something was changing again. The hybrid code within them wasn't just reacting. It was awakening, unlocking fragments that had until now remained sealed. The path curved, dipped, and widened into a circular antechamber carved with intricate spirals and fractal patterns that defied human logic. At its center stood a spire of black crystal suspended in midair, spinning slowly. Below it, etched into the floor, was a symbol that pulsed in sync with their heartbeats. They stepped onto the pattern without hesitation. Instantly, the chamber came alive. The walls surged with luminous waves. The spire flared, projecting a beam of light upward. Their minds were seized, not painfully, but forcefully, and drawn into a vision far beyond the physical. In this shared mental space, time ceased. They stood at the edge of the stars. Around them, galaxies bloomed and withered. They saw the ancients as they truly were, architects not of civilization, but of potential. They had shaped species across systems, not out of dominance, but preservation. DNA was their language, and Earth was one of many canvases. But something had gone wrong. A faction of their kind, obsessed with control, had altered the course of the experiment. Hybrids were never meant to be weapons. They were meant to be bridges between the past and the future, between survival and evolution. That balance had been broken, and now, the burden of restoration lay with those who carried the true design. The vision faded. They collapsed to their knees, chests heaving, sweat glistening against their altered skin. But they were no longer the same. Their minds held echoes of eons. Their blood hummed with activated code. Their purpose was no longer vague or instinctive. It had become clear. And the path continued. They rose and pressed forward, deeper still. The walls began to change, from smooth stone to metallic sinew, from symbols to carvings of creatures neither fully organic nor machine. The deeper levels were more than a tomb. They were a test, a forge. Each chamber they crossed seemed to strip away another layer of humanity, demanding adaptation, resilience, clarity of purpose. Their bodies evolved as they walked. Skin toughened. Vision adjusted to frequencies no human eye could endure. Reflexes sharpened beyond what the conscious mind could register. They felt themselves shedding a former identity, not in rejection, but in rebirth. What waited at the end was not a door. It was a gate, not made by hands, but formed by thought, suspended between dimensions. It pulsed with unreadable glyphs that shimmered in and out of reality, and the energy it gave off wasn't heat or light, but memory, compressed, unbearable, raw. They approached as one. Together, they extended their hands. The gate recognized them, not as intruders, but as heirs. And slowly, impossibly, it opened. Beyond it lay the final truth. As the gate parted, reality seemed to hesitate. Beyond it lay not a corridor or chamber, but a space suspended in impossibility, where the laws of matter bent and the very air shimmered with sentience. Time, too, lost its grip here. The moments did not pass. They swirled, coexisted, overlapped. The ground beneath their feet was no longer stone or metal, but a fluid surface of living energy, black like the void, but threaded with currents of starlight. Each step left behind ripples that formed constellations before dissolving into nothing. The silence here was total, not absence, but focus. The kind of stillness found only at the beginning of creation, or its end. In the center of the void, a structure hovered, not built, but born. A sphere of semi-transparent crystal, within which danced shifting patterns of light and memory. Not images, not sounds, thoughts, pure, unfiltered consciousness. This was not a place of observation, but communion. They stepped forward. The sphere pulsed once, gently, and accepted them. They did not see. They became. Their minds expanded until they no longer fit within their own bodies. Their perceptions multiplied, and suddenly they were no longer Jake and Zodra alone, but vessels through which the architects poured their essence. They witnessed the origin. A civilization so ancient that stars had died during its reign. A people who had learned not only to manipulate matter, but to weave memory into biology, to shape species with purpose, to encode prophecy into DNA. The architects were not gods. They were gardeners, cultivators of evolution. But among them, dissent had grown. Some believed in seeding harmony. Others hungered for dominance. The schism had torn them apart. Worlds had been lost to it. Earth was one of the last experiments, hidden away, a silent nursery left to grow without interference. Until humanity began to tamper. Until Project Chimera awakened what should have remained dormant. Jake now understood what he was. Not an accident. Not a weapon. But a bridge. He and Zodra had been altered, yes, shaped by science, twisted by hands that didn't understand the original design. But the core within them remained true. Activated. Chosen. They were the awakening. The point where the timeline curved inward, closing a circle that had remained open for eons. But the architects could no longer guide them, only warn. The visions shifted, Earth in flames, corrupted hybrids consuming entire cities. The balance lost once more. And then, another path, cities blooming in harmony with nature, hybrid children leading a new civilization, connected to the memory of the stars. The gate was not an end. It was a choice. They stood together, silent, knowing that what they chose now would not only shape themselves, it would ripple forward into generations unborn. Behind them, the path remained open. Above them, war was likely already unfolding. Before them, the architects waited, not to command, but to witness. The time for observation had ended. Now came action. They emerged from the gate as if reborn, not through fire or light, but through memory and purpose. Their bodies carried the same shape, but their presence was unmistakably different. They no longer walked as survivors, but as bearers of something vast. Something that no longer fit within the boundaries of species or language. Behind them, the sphere of the architects receded, folding in on itself like a dream returning to slumber. The gate sealed once more, not with resistance, but with trust, for what had been passed on could never be undone. The path was no longer one of return. It was forward, into a future unwritten. The ascent through the tunnels was slow and solemn. The symbols that had once pulsed with questioning light now flickered in acknowledgement. The walls seemed to exhale, releasing them with reverence, as if recognizing that those who had gone in were no longer the same as those who now passed through. As they climbed, the vibrations of conflict reached them. The upper levels of the facility were under siege. Shouting, gunfire, the grinding screech of metal tearing, all the sounds of a structure collapsing under the weight of its own secrets. The world above was reacting like a wounded animal, thrashing against the truth breaking free from within its own vaults. But Jake and Zodra no longer moved like prey. They passed through smoke and fire, untouched. Their steps carried gravity, not just in weight, but in meaning. Where bullets once tore through flesh, now they glanced off skin that shimmered with layered resilience. Where soldiers once saw an enemy, now they faced something they could not name. And in that confusion, many stepped back. Some lowered their weapons. A few even fell to their knees, not in worship, but in recognition. The facility burned. Monitors flickered and died. Samples and specimens withered in containment tanks, rendered obsolete by the living proof that now stood beyond glass and theory. Project Chimera, in its ambition, had reached too far, and unknowingly reawakened what no science could contain. They found their way to the surface. The night sky awaited them, cloudless, vast, and infinite. Stars blinked above, unknowing yet ever watchful. The forest stretched out in all directions, no longer a barrier but a promise. The air was clean, wild, primal. They inhaled deeply, their bodies attuning to the rhythms of a world they were finally ready to walk upon. They did not speak. There was no need. The connection between them pulsed quietly, a resonance of thought and vision. In their minds, the memory of the architects remained, not as voices or commands, but as echoes of potential. The choice was now theirs, not to dominate, not to hide, but to guide. For the world was not ready, but it would be. The age of hybrids had begun, not in war, but in awakening. And from that moment forward, every step they took would shape the future not just of Earth, but of everything it had once been chosen to protect. Jake looked ahead, Zodra beside him. The forest awaited, and so did the stars.